So Rotten Tomatoes has unveiled a new dimension to its popcorn meter called Verified Hot. So we have a quote here from Amanda Norvell, who's the Senior Vice President of Direct-to-Consumer Services at the company, saying, quote, "On Rotten Tomatoes, fans love to consult our verified audience score in addition to the Tomato Meter critic score when discovering new movies and deciding what they want to watch next. With the addition of Verified Hot, we are excited to celebrate and shine a spotlight on the theatrical films that fans have unanimously embraced and have taken the time to share their incredible movie-going experience with other fans," end quote. So a little bit of a primer on how Rotten Tomatoes works. So it's a review aggregator, right? And when you go to a movie's Rotten Tomatoes page and it says 83%, the score reflects what percent of reviewers gave a film a positive review. Rotten Tomatoes defines a positive review as like a 6 out of 10 or 60% or whatever it is or better, right? So again, if everyone is not an average of the scores, that 83%. If everyone gives a movie a 6 out of 10, it would have a 100% rating, right? It's more of a statistical probability of will you have a net positive experience. Now, that doesn't mean that really does nothing to answer will you have an overwhelmingly net positive experience or just a net positive experience. Maybe that's how it works. So it originally started as just critics, right? And there was this idea of fresh versus rotten, right? So if it had a 60% or more, it was considered fresh. If it had 59% or less, it was rotten. And then they eventually introduced verified fresh. So this would be a tomato meter, is what they call it. A tomato meter score of 75% or higher with at least 5 reviews from what Rotten Tomatoes has designated as top critics. So these are critics who are working for major publications, who have been in the game for a really long time, as opposed to, an upstart blogger who is legit enough to even be included on Rotten Tomatoes, right? Because I write film reviews, but I don't get to be included. So it adds a level of like, okay, a movie can be fresh, but then there's an extra badge of honor if it's verified fresh, right? And similarly, they also have an audience score where fans can give it a rating, similar deal. If it's a 6 out of 10 or better, that counts as positive and not. And then if it's 60% or more, instead of being fresh or rotten, because it's a popcorn meter, it's either hot or stale. The issue with audience scores is that they can be easily manipulated, right? So, at least the critics have to be like actual people that have like a reputation that they want to presumably preserve. Anyone can just make an account and review a movie even if they haven't seen it, right? And this, of course, leads to review bombing, where the intentional, effort to leave bad scores on movies, particularly when you don't like it because you consider it quote unquote woke, right? So now they're introducing, similar to Verified Fresh, they're introducing Verified Hot. And this will be a badge that a movie will be awarded based on those who actually saw the movie. So Rotten Tomatoes' parent company is Fandango, like the movie ticket servicing company. So the idea is going to be that if enough people who Fandango and Rotten Tomatoes can verify actually bought a ticket and saw this movie, if enough of those people give it a hot rating, right, a fresh, a positive rating, if enough people do that, it'll get that Verified Hot badge, right? They do eventually plan to collaborate with other ticket vendors to expand this functionality. So like if for me, I get a lot of my tickets directly through like AMC or Regal. Like I have the apps. I don't use Fandango for that. So the plan is to eventually expand that. Again, this is all in an effort to prevent or at least mitigate review bombing. And like we talked about earlier this evening, The Acolyte, the Star Wars show, The Acolyte is one of the most recent examples of something where that has a 78% critic score and an 18% audience score. One could argue that critics are just out of touch, but that seems like that's a much larger issue. Ultimately, people shouldn't put too much stock in these scores, right? I think people try to look at it almost like sports, and which is very numbers based. And they try to go, like, if you're a fan of one franchise and you're pitting yourself against another franchise, well, our film had a higher Rotten Tomatoes score than your film, blah, 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 and it becomes this weird thing. Again, something like Rotten Tomatoes especially is really good for a statistical probability. That if I see a movie has an 83%, that means there's an 83% chance I'm going to have a net positive experience with this film. But these scores shouldn't define a film. And The Independent notes a tweet from an unknown user. I don't know why a mainstream publication like The Independent wouldn't give the source of the tweet, like who said this. But this is a really interesting tweet, so I was like, I had to include this. And the tweet was, quote, "The worst thing Rotten Tomatoes has done is gradually elevating the importance of audience scores alongside critic scores. That's not what the site was ever supposed to be," end quote. Because when you go on Rotten Tomatoes, you see both scores right next to each other, which gives which signals this idea that audiences and critics are kind of this co-equal critical entity, which is just not the case. Most people don't have good taste in movies, right? And it's not their fault. They just don't have the training necessarily, right? Or even just the exposure to enough movies. So, and again, because they don't really have a reputation that they need to preserve, they can be very motivated by very self-interested personal motivations, right? So this is an interesting addition to Rotten Tomatoes. It'll be interesting. What will be interesting to see is if it actually solves or at least fixes somewhat of the review bombing problem.